And welcome back to the Hot Lap. We're talking all of the fallout from the Hungarian Grand Prix, from Oscar Piastri, maybe to some controversially not winning the race due to that strategy, from what on earth happened to Charles Leclerc and that epic fall-off, to an interesting take on the non-penalty from Max Verstappen when he pushed or didn't push Lewis Hamilton off that very track, to Alonso spewing more British bias. Yeah, let's get into it. This is the fallout for the Hungarian Grand Prix. So let's begin with Charles Leclerc and what on earth was going on at Ferrari. Now, we're not talking Lewis Hamilton. A bit more on that later on why Lewis Hamilton, you shouldn't really rule him out yet, even though kind of after qualifying he ruled himself out, let's be fair. So, Charles Leclerc, as we know, the F1 team says it's going to need a full investigation into why Charles Leclerc's pace fell off a cliff in that third stint. Because let's be fair, 2/3 of the race in, he did look like he was going to win the race. I mean, you could place your bet, you could confidently place a tenner, I think, halfway through the race to think that Charles Leclerc was still going to win. Simply because, yes, that McLaren may have been faster in the hands of Piastri, but Leclerc, one, was pulling away at the beginning, and two, Piastri couldn't really get close enough to even think about passing until that third stint. As we know, Leclerc did take that surprise pole, and it was a surprise pole because in that third qualifying session, Q3, everyone went slow except Leclerc. But there we go. So what happened in the race? Well, he looked at some point to win the race. Then he looked like he was potentially going to get a podium. And then that final stint came. He dropped behind both McLarens and was more than 35 seconds. Plus, obviously, later on, George Russell getting him as well. Now, its driver initially thought Ferrari had made a front wing adjustment. He thought something was wrong with that epic, if you remember, that epic radio call that ended up being more like a dissertation than a couple of notes. But he later corrected himself after being informed of what was an inherent car problem. Now, Vassar said on Sunday night it was too early to conclude what that exact issue was, but he suggested that the extent of Leclerc's pace loss went far beyond its usual measures. Yes, indeed it did. He said, once we lost the pace in previous races, he said, we lost 2 or 3 tenths. Today we lost 2 seconds. A bit different. And absolutely, it is a bit different from Fred Vassar. The last stint, he said, was a disaster, very difficult to drive the balance, and was not there. And honestly, we don't know exactly what's happened so far. We have to investigate it. If we have something broken on that chassis side, at one stage, I thought he would never finish the race. That we were lucky to score points for 4th, and it's surprising because we'd known that before, or we should have solved it. But they don't know what's wrong. That's the interesting thing with Ferrari. They don't know what's wrong. Having said that, a certain George Russell potentially knows what's wrong. He suspects Ferrari were close to being illegal. Yeah. The young word. George Russell suspects Charles Leclerc, and this is from Race Fans, link in the description, as usual, lost pace at the end of the Hungarian Grand Prix because they were concerned about wear on Charles Leclerc's car, as in wear of that plank. The Mercedes driver, if you remember watching the race, he passed Leclerc for 3rd, and he said himself, I saw how slow he was, so I presumed something was not right, he told Sky. Leclerc ran strongly early on in the race, as we already talked about. And Russell suspects that Ferrari were concerned about the potentially excessive wear on the legality of that plank on the underside of Leclerc's car. He said they may have increased his tyre pressure when he made up the final pit stop on lap 41. What would that do? Well, the increased tyre pressure would raise the car up a bit more, maybe just enough to stop that wear on the plank. If you remember, Lewis Hamilton was disqualified for the Chinese Grand Prix, for example, for having too much wear underneath. Now, the plank is underneath the car, and the reason it's there is to make sure that the cars aren't so low, no pun intended, that they get a massive advantage and nearly scrape the floor. So it limits how low you can have the car, because if the plank is worn too much, ergo, you're DQ'd. And he said he's not going to tell, Russell did say, this is what I thought was interesting, he's not going to tell you that they're close to being illegal, Russell said. He said the only thing we can think of is if they were running the car too low to the ground, they had to increase the tyre pressure for the last stint. And he said they were using, and Russell said he caught Leclerc, he noticed Ferrari were using an engine mode that was making the engine slow at the end of the straight, which is where you'd have the most amount of plank wear. Conspiracy theorists stand up. Is that the reason why? Even Leclerc was not really overt about saying what exactly was wrong, and nor was Fred Vassar. And even Hamilton was talking about potential reasons but not wanting to discuss them. So yes, the Ferrari mystery continues, but the Yuki Tsunoda mystery doesn't, because sadly Yuki Tsunoda is currently on the worst pointless streaks ever recorded by a Red Bull driver, and that's not including DNF. What do I mean? Well, the last few races: 17th, 13th, 12th, 16th, 15th, 13th, and 17th. I mean, that's just horrendous. You got Monaco 17th, Spain 13th, Canada 12th, Austria 16th, Great Britain 15th for the UK, 13th in Belgium, and 17th in Hungary. Another second victim, perhaps. So Oscar Piastri, was Oscar Piastri screwed out of a potential win? Well, he said himself, well done, this was his engineer to Oscar Piastri. Well done, mate. That was really close, Oscar. Really close. Great job racing. Good job. And good stuff. Great racing. We're going to shutdown. Still leading both, we're going into shutdown. Still leading both championships. Good first half of the season. And then it was radio silence from Oscar. What does that mean? Simply, Stella did have something to say after that race, and he responded to it. He'd batted away, though, any suggestion of the split-in strategy being unfair on Oscar, taking full advantage of the one-stop approach, and the irony being it was Lando Norris's bad start that gave him and his engineers the idea for this one-stop, which no one thought would work. Everyone said it was going to be a two-stop going into the race. Now, Piastri's championship lead, as we know now, is cut down to just 9 points. Piastri was on that two-stop, which ended up not winning the race. The argument I would make, though, the argument I'd make before we get into it, is Piastri had plenty of chances to get past Charles Leclerc. He couldn't, whether that was because of the car, or not fast enough, etc. Now, Norris's attack on Piastri at the start of the Hungarian Grand Prix, it did backfire. Piastri covering Norris off, as Norris ended up dropping to 5th, and then it was to 4th shortly after he disposed of the Aston Martin. But it was Norris, as we know, who ultimately claimed victory over Leclerc and Piastri. Piastri did 2 stops. That did allow him to mount a challenge against Norris for the win in the closing laps, but Lando Norris held firm. He soaked up that pressure. Now, having pitted Piastri for the first time on lap 19 and again 46, he returned to the track peacefully behind Leclerc, but he made it was easy business getting past Leclerc. Obviously, he couldn't get past Lando Norris. So, what did Stella have to say? He said, had we pitted Oscar before, he might have ended up behind Lando, but we wanted to give Oscar enough of a tyre delta to pass Leclerc, but also to have a fair chance on Lando, because that would have meant being on an optimal two-stop. That's what he told the media. He carried on saying, so we wanted to make sure that thinking about Leclerc, we were not deviating too much of an optimal two-stop, because that would have been unfair to Oscar in relation to his competition with Lando, which was fair, they're saying. He said, and we also checked with Oscar what is better, of course. Certainly, he wanted to have an opportunity to win the race, and we thought that with enough tyre delta to Leclerc, Oscar would have had the chance in the end. He said, so I think, actually, let me say that the race unfolded pretty much as we hoped. It would unfold in terms of tyre behaviour, which means tyres that lasted enough for a stop when we decided to keep Lando out. So yeah, I think it's kind of fair. It just fell into it. Now, I know Mercedes and Toto Wolff, the way they went racing is both Mercedes had very similar strategies. Although, for example, when you look at Bahrain in the desert, and I think in Spain from 2014, yes, they were fair. But one started on the hard, one started on the medium or soft, and then they ended up, for example, switching it around. So their tyre deltas were always sometimes the opposite. Or strategy. So it wasn't always the same, and it's really, really difficult in a championship when you've got two sides of the garage to for both sides to think, yes, everyone's being really, really fair. Having said that, both had opportunities to win the race, but Piastri had the opportunity to try and get past Leclerc at the start. He didn't. Norris had an opportunity to try and get past, Piastri at the start. He didn't. Then he went into race saving mode to do a one stop. The question, I think, of how unfair or fair it is, comes about is as to whether the engineers said to Piastri, do you want to do a one-stop? That was mooted when they suggested that one-stop, ask him whether a one-stop was possible at the beginning of the race. It sadly didn't happen. Piastri didn't want any of it. But at no point did they suggest that Lando was doing a one-stop having said that, when you go back to Belgium, that was different as well, with Lando on the hard tyres, which arguably probably favoured Lando. The last two strategies have, just Lando made it work in Hungary rather than Belgium. And if you go back, for example, to Belgium last year, yes, I know he got disqualified, but George Russell, he ended up winning the Belgian Grand Prix, and even Lewis Hamilton was like, well, that's unfair because you didn't tell me to do a one-stop, and had you told me, I would have done a one-stop, ergo potentially beating George. But there we go. So next up, and this is an interesting take, I thought, on the penalty, on the penalty between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Now, as you can see here, this is a 2024 Hungary, 2025 Hungary. And what I think is interesting is this guy, Rob Myers, I've quoted him before. Yes, he is a Hamilton fan. But he said, Hungary 2024, the stewards concluded, Hamilton could have done more to avoid a collision, so no penalty for Max. Apparently no more penalty for Max or whatever. And in 2025, he said there was no contact because Hamilton chose not to attempt to remain on the track. So no penalty for Max. And they were saying it's almost as if they try to make excuses for him. I don't know about that, but he's got a point there. I mean, the stewards, but no, a year later have conflicting opinions, which kind of makes you start to question everything. It's just a bit weird, isn't it? And there we go. I mean, I think if Hamilton's trajectory continued, as you would normally the corner, they're hitting each other. That's an absolute, I think that's almost a fact, although we don't know. Verstappen said, I just set my nose next to him. He gets scared and goes off track. He said, I'm actually pretty disappointed. I have to go to the stewards after the race, just analyse it in the race. Of course, it's Max. I've always been of the view that you've got one of the best drivers ever of his generation, if not the best of his generation. In terms of speed, in terms of talent, he just can't race. He can't race fair. When it comes down to certain pressure situations, he just doesn't have it in terms of racing fair. We've seen enough. We've seen so many times at this point with Max Verstappen. It's a foregone conclusion. It's pretty much a fact. If you want to defend him, absolutely defend him. But you would be defending many crimes. There's many precedents. So good luck defending that. You're more than welcome to come on here, and I'll quite happily have that debate with you. But yeah. So moving on to Lewis Hamilton. He says, I'm not where I want to be yet, but the fight's not over. Don't count me out. And that's not as difficult start with Ferrari. And this is also from motorsport.com, and after a tough Hungarian Grand Prix, Lewis vowed to come back stronger following the summer break. The 7-time champion said, don't count me out after what was, as we know, let's be fair, probably one of his worst weekends for years, if not ever. He was, though, particularly hard on himself. If you remember, he called himself useless. And when asked to clarify his remarks the next day, he said, when you have a feeling, you have a feeling. There's a lot going on in the background, and that is not great. He said it's been a challenging week and one to move on from, he said in the team's debrief. Now, I think this is when cooler heads potentially prevailed. And Hamilton went on to say, we weren't able to make the progress we hoped for, but I'm grateful for the effort everyone in the team put in throughout the weekend. Now we head into the break. I'll be using the time to reset, recharge, and come back stronger. I'm not where I want to be yet, but the fight's not over. Don't count me out. We're not, Lewis. And Ferrari team principal Fred Vassar looked for positives in Hamilton's weekend, but also explained that the Maranello outfit will be investigating that drop in pace for Leclerc, but we've already spoken about that. As for Lewis, starting on hards, as we know, he lost a couple of places. That put him in traffic and what was a very long DRS train. Having said that, he started so far back again. Unlike Belgium, it's Hungary, it is harder to pass. And he said that's what obviously decided the one stop for him. But with Lewis, I want to take a positive. Don't count me out. He'll be back. We know so many times Lewis has made his comebacks. Now on to Fernando Alonso and his just obsession with the UK and British bias and everyone being unfair, and he should be more than a 2-time world champion. Yeah, Gabriel Bortoleto is the best rookie of his generation. To be fair, in terms of that, yeah, he's one of the best rookies. Either him and Hadjar, I think, are going to be rookie of the year. And what Bortoleto did, I think landed an amazing Grand Prix. Maybe you disagree. And Bortoleto, though, did he deserve driver of the day? Potentially. But I do think he deserved driver of the weekend. That's an absolute, the way he qualified and the way he did that race and the way he kept Verstappen behind at the beginning, it was just absolutely fantastic. But then there's the Fernando Alonso factor. I mean, this guy's got a massive chip on his shoulder, isn't he? So Fernando Alonso has said that Sauber's Gabriel Bortoleto is the best rookie of his generation. Yes, fair enough. He commits fewer errors, always putting pressure. Remember, Alonso, for the caveat, is his manager. Now, this is what's annoying. If he was English or something and finished 6th in a Sauber, he'd be all in the news tomorrow, which he does is exceptional. Get a life, Fernando. I mean, no. It's from Brazil. I'm sure the Brazilian headlines are absolutely, this guy's absolutely amazing. He made driver of the race. Sky even spoke about it. People have done articles about it. You're just a bitter, bitter man because you were beaten by Lewis Hamilton in 2007, equal on points. Probably not talent that year, though. And it was a difficult year for you, though, Alonso. I know he obviously had to battle more than Lewis. He had to battle, I think, a McLaren garage, really. But he's ever since that year, it's kind of poisoned him in a way, hasn't it? Sadly, for his own mental anguish going to other teams. And then ever since then, he's been called, some people behind the scenes have said he's been quite difficult. I think he's a very talented driver. Given if the Aston Martin was as good as the McLaren this year or next year, he may well win a world championship. I like him. I like all the drivers, really, if I'm honest. But the issue being is, he's just spewing bile sometimes, and he doesn't need to do that. Why? Yeah, why does he have to have a dig? Why? Maybe the cynic in me is saying, just hopefully he's just trying to big his driver up, and that's what he's trying to do. That's what he's trying to do. But anyway, I digress. So, if you made it to the end, that's absolutely amazing. If you are not subscribed, please consider if this video has made you subscribe or even unsubscribe with my Fernando Alonso comments. But until then, I just want to say you watching this is more than enough for us. If you want to do a bit more other than subscribe, hit that like button. It does mean a lot. But until then, we'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much. And above all else, stay safe.